So we jump forward a few years to 1942 in a case that comes out of the state of Oklahoma. And the law in question is something known as the Habitual Criminal Sterilization Act. And what it did is it provided for compulsory sterilization after a third penalty for crimes of quote-unquote moral turpitude, which simply is, in essence, really any crime that Oklahoma wanted to, stuff into this area. But this case kind of goes a different way. What the court says in this case is that we're dealing here with legislation which involved one of the basic civil rights of man. Marriage and procreation are fundamental to the very existence and survival of the race. There is no redemption for an individual whom the law touches. Any experiment which the state conducts is to his irreparable injury, and he is forever deprived of his basic liberty. So you can hear that the notion of what the court is arguing here is very different from 1927. And the reason why is the individual in question in this case was married. And the court invokes two things as quote-unquote fundamental rights. And fundamental rights really stick to that Ninth Amendment portion of the Constitution that says that, well, it's not in the Bill of Rights, but there are rights that the people retain outside of the Bill of Rights. And the two that are identified here in Skinner v. Oklahoma are marriage and procreation, primarily procreation within the marital bounds, which is why they tie the two together. So the argument here is that, in essence, this deprivation by the state of Oklahoma violates the Equal Protection Clause. And they recognize that by saying, we advert to these issues of fundamental rights in emphasis of our view that strict scrutiny of the classification which the state makes in a sterilization law is essential, let unwilling or otherwise invidious discrimination are made against groups or types of individuals in violation of their constitutional guarantee of just and equal laws. So what is unique about this case is that, A, they invoke this notion of fundamental rights, that there exists some fundamental liberties that exist beyond the Bill of Rights. They state it very clearly. And that furthermore, if you are trying to deprive an individual or class of individuals of some of their inherent rights, that strict scrutiny must be applied to those cases. And so in this case, the court overturns or declares unconstitutional the law in question, but Buck v. Bell is not overturned in this case. It still remains good law, and one of the concurrents mentions very specifically the disconnect that exists between those two things. That in this case, we really can't distinguish Skinner v. Oklahoma from the issue at Buck v. Bell, because there's a broad distinction between the two. Forced sterilization is forced sterilization. There's really no differentiation. And if you're going to decide one way in Skinner v. Oklahoma, it seems that Buck v. Bell would be directly opposed to it. So we've kind of set the stage to the evolving nature of the court. In Buck v. Bell, there is no due process violation to forced sterilization. In Skinner v. Oklahoma, however, especially within the confines of marriage, there is an equal protection violation because it violates the fundamental rights of man. And so this marriage is mentioned as a fundamental right, as is procreation. We'll see in the next case that this is taken to the next really logical conclusion, but does so in an environment that is a bit unexpected.